My name is Margaret, I'm 72 years old, and my own son told me I was a burden and tried to put me in a nursing home. Before I tell you how I drained our joint account and vanished without a trace, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It helps to know I'm not alone in this. The clock on the mantelpiece, the one my late husband Robert bought for our 25th anniversary, ticked loudly in the silence. It was the only sound in the room after my son Michael dropped his bomb. He stood on the Persian rug Robert and I had picked out together, right in the center of the living room we'd built from the ground up. His wife, Jessica, stood beside him, a little behind like a shadow with a venomous bite. "Mom," Michael started, and he couldn't even look me in the eye. He was staring at a spot on the wall just over my shoulder. "Jessica and we've been talking, and we think it's time." I just looked at him, my teacup growing cold in my hands. I'd raised this boy. I'd held him when he had nightmares. I'd cheered the loudest at his little league games. I'd helped him and Jessica with the down payment on their house with our savings after his father's funeral. "Time for what, Michael?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. He finally met my gaze, and what I saw there chilled me to the bone. It wasn't concern. It wasn't love. It was inconvenience. I was an item on his to-do list that he needed to check off. "You're becoming a burden," he said. The words came out flat, rehearsed. "We're worried about you here all alone. You forget things. It's not safe. It's time for you to go to a nursing home." A burden. The word echoed in the sudden, deafening quiet. It felt like a physical blow. A punch to the gut that knocked all the air out of my lungs. For a moment all I could hear was a ringing in my ears. I looked at my son, the man I had given everything for, and I saw a stranger. A cold, calculating stranger who was calmly dismantling my life. Jessica stepped forward then, putting a hand on Michael's arm and giving me that sickly sweet smile she was so good at. "It's a wonderful facility, Margaret," she cooed, as if she were talking about a vacation resort. "It's called the Golden Years Pavilion. It has a pool and activities. You'll make friends your own age." They had it all planned out. They had a name for the place where they were going to store me away. The finality of it was suffocating. They weren't asking me. They were telling me. My home, my life, my dignity. It was all being stripped away right here on this rug that held so many of our family's memories. I looked around the room, at the photos of my grandchildren Leo and Chloe on the mantelpiece, at the worn spot on Robert's favorite armchair, at the scuff marks on the floor from when Michael was a boy, racing his toy cars. This wasn't just a house, it was a testament to a life well lived. A life of love and sacrifice. And they were trying to erase me from it. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud, violent break, but a quiet, cold one. The searing pain in my chest turned to ice. The hurt didn't disappear, but it crystallized into something else. Something hard and clear. Resolve. I set my teacup down on its saucer with a steady hand. The clink was sharp in the tense air. I looked up, first at Jessica's fake, placating smile, and then I locked eyes with my son. The boy I knew was gone. In his place was a man I no longer recognized, and certainly no longer owed anything to. "All right," I said. My own voice surprised me. It was level, devoid of the tremor I felt in my heart. "If that's what you want." A wave of relief washed over their faces. It was disgusting. They had expected a fight, tears, pleading. They had prepared for an emotional scene. They were not prepared for my surrender. Michael even managed a weak smile. "It's for the best, Mom. You'll see." I didn't say another word. I just nodded slowly, watching them. They thought they had one. They saw a frail, confused old woman who had finally given in to the inevitable. They saw an easy end to their problem, a clear path to my inheritance and the sale of this house. They didn't see the fire starting behind my eyes. They didn't see the gears turning. The years of being underestimated coalescing into a single sharp point of focus. As I stood up and walked past them toward my bedroom, they thought I was going to pack. They thought I was going to cry. They had made a terrible, terrible mistake. They had forgotten that I was the one who taught my husband how to balance a checkbook, the one who navigated the contracts when we built this house, the one who managed every single penny of our finances for 50 years. They had forgotten who I really was. They were about to get a very harsh reminder. As I closed my bedroom door behind me, the lock clicking shut felt like the cocking of a gun. I didn't reach for a suitcase. I reached for the phone. To truly understand the ice that formed in my veins in that living room, you have to go back 6 months, to the bleak November day we buried my Robert. The funeral was a miserable affair. A blur of black coats and hushed condolences under a perpetually weeping Ohio sky. I remember standing by the graveside, feeling like a hollowed-out shell, and Michael was right there, his arm a steel band around my shoulders. Jessica stood on my other side, her face a perfect portrait of sorrow, constantly dabbing at my cheeks with a tissue that smelled faintly of her expensive perfume. "We're here for you, Margaret," she whispered, her voice cracking with practiced emotion. "You will never, ever be alone." In the raw, gaping wound of my grief, their presence was an anesthetic. I clung to them, to the idea of them, because the alternative was an abyss of loneliness I couldn't bear to face. "We'll take care of everything, Mom," Michael had sworn to me at the bleak funeral reception, piling a plate with food I couldn't eat. I believed him. With every fiber of my broken heart, I believed him. In those first weeks, they were perfect. They'd come over almost every night, bringing casseroles and grandchildren, filling the suffocating silence of the house with a temporary chaotic warmth. Michael would tackle the man jobs, as he called them, fixing a loose railing on the porch, changing the oil in my car. Jessica would flit around the kitchen, reorganizing my spice rack and clucking her tongue about the expiration dates in my pantry. "We just want to make things easier for you, Margaret," she'd say. It all seemed so loving. But even through the fog of my morning, tiny, discordant notes began to sound. Little things that felt wrong, like a key that doesn't quite fit a lock. Jessica had a habit of picking up my antiques, the little porcelain figures Robert and I had collected over the years. She'd turn them over, examining the maker's marks. "Oh, this is a Hummel, isn't it?" she'd ask, her voice a little too bright. "These can be worth a pretty penny." It wasn't the observation of an admirer. It was the calculation of an appraiser. And Michael talked about money. All the time. His salary as a marketing manager was insulting. The mortgage on their new, oversized house in the suburbs was crippling. The cost of Leo's braces and Chloe's ballet lessons was bleeding them dry. It was a constant dripping faucet of financial anxiety, and the unspoken implication was always that Robert and I had it so easy, that our carefully managed, debt-free life was some kind of ancient relic. The first real fissure, the one that sent a deep crack through my foundation of denial, appeared about a month after the funeral. Michael came over by himself one Tuesday night. He sat in Robert's armchair, a thing no one had done yet, and it felt like a usurpation. He fidgeted, avoided my eyes, and then finally leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. "Mom," he said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "I've been presented with an incredible business opportunity. A friend of mine is flipping a commercial property. It's a guaranteed home run, a real life changer. But the window to get in is closing fast, and the buy-in is steep. I'm a little short." My heart, the soft, foolish heart of a mother who sees her child in need, immediately went out to him. I didn't see a 42-year-old man who lived beyond his means. I saw my little boy struggling, trying to build a better life for his family. I saw a chance to help, to still be needed, to still be a mother of purpose. "How much do you need, sweetie?" I asked, my voice already full of capitulation. "20,000, he said, the number coming out a little too quickly. He must have rehearsed it. "It's just a short-term loan, of course. The deal will close in 90 days tops. I'll pay you back then, with a nice bit of interest for your trouble. You won't regret this." $20,000. It was a lot of money, a significant chunk of the liquid savings Robert and I had painstakingly accumulated. It was our emergency fund, our what-if cushion. But what bigger emergency was there than your only child's future? I walked to the little secretary desk in the corner, my hand steady as I wrote out the check. I felt a pang of something, Robert's voice in my head, perhaps counseling caution, but I pushed it aside. I handed the check to Michael. He took it, his eyes shining with a relief that looked genuine. He jumped up and wrapped me in a hug so tight it stole my breath. "You're a lifesaver, Mom. A real lifesaver. You've just secured your grandchildren's college fund." The 90 days came and went. The deal was never mentioned again. When I finally gathered the courage to ask about it, my tone gentle and apologetic, he became defensive. "Oh, that," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. The financing fell through. It got complicated. The money's tied up. Tied up. Not gone, not lost, but tied up. A vague, impenetrable phrase designed to end the conversation. There was no talk of repayment. It was simply gone. That was the moment I felt the first real chill. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the lie. I had given him a lifeline, and he had treated it like his entitlement. I tried to tell myself it was a one-time thing, a bad investment, a moment of desperation. But deep down I knew. That check hadn't been a loan. It had been a test. And I had failed spectacularly. After the loan, the nature of their visits began to shift. The performance of caring children continued, but it now had a sharp, insidious edge. Their helpfulness became a weapon, and their target was my sanity. This was Jessica's specialty. She began a subtle but relentless campaign of psychological warfare. It started with small things, designed to make me feel disoriented and incompetent. I've kept my reading glasses on my nightstand for as long as I can remember. One morning they were gone. I spent a frantic hour searching for them before Jessica discovered them inside the refrigerator, nestled next to the milk. "Oh, Margaret, silly you," she chirped, handing them to me. "We have to be more careful, don't we?" I had no memory of putting them there, but her certainty, her kind condescension made me doubt myself. Was I really that forgetful? A week later, a bill from the utility company arrived, stamped past due in angry red letters. I was horrified. I have never, in 50 years of marriage and widowhood, missed a payment. I knew I had paid it. I remembered writing the check and putting it in the mail. But when I told Michael, he exchanged a worried look with Jessica. "Mom, are you sure?" he asked gently. "It's okay if you forgot. It happens." Jessica then made a great show of paying the bill online for me, explaining each step as if I were a small child. "See? It's all taken care of now. Don't you worry your pretty little head about it." I felt a hot, helpless shame. They were creating a narrative of my decline, and I was being cast as the lead actress without my consent. The campaign escalated. They started helping me sort through Robert's old things in the attic. Jessica would hold up an old photograph and ask, "Who is this, Margaret?" When I hesitated for even a second to recall a cousin's name from 40 years ago, she would sigh. "It's okay. Memories fade." The true, unforgivable act of cruelty, the one that ripped the veil from my eyes completely, was the theft of Robert's watch. It wasn't just a watch, it was a piece of him. It was a gold Omega he'd received upon his retirement from the auto plant. He was so proud of it. After he died, I kept it in the velvet-lined jewelry box on my dresser. Every morning I would wind it. The soft, steady ticking was a comforting presence, a tiny heartbeat in the silent house. One Tuesday, after Jessica had spent the morning helping me organize my closet, a task I hadn't asked her to do, I went to wind the watch. I opened the heavy lid of the jewelry box. The indented space where it always lay was starkly, shockingly empty. A cold, metallic panic flooded my system. It wasn't mislaid, I knew it. This was different. I tore my bedroom apart, my hands shaking so badly I could barely open the drawers. I pulled everything out, creating a storm of clothes and linens on the floor. It was gone. I called Michael, my voice a strangled sob. "The watch. Michael, your father's watch is gone. Someone has stolen it." There was a carefully calculated pause on his end. "Whoa, Mom, slow down. Stolen? That's a serious accusation. Are you sure you didn't just put it somewhere for safekeeping?" His voice was a slick bomb of false reason. Jessica was just there. She would have noticed if a burglar came in. "Let me talk to her." He called back 15 minutes later, his tone now grave and sorrowful. "Mom, Jessica says you were a little confused this morning. She said you were talking about putting your valuables in the bank's safe deposit box. She thinks you must have taken it there and forgotten. Why don't you check there before you start calling the police?" The manipulation was so skillful it almost worked. The seed of doubt was there. Was it possible? Had my grief and loneliness finally unmoored my mind? I felt a wave of dizziness and had to sit down. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of me questioning my own memory, feeling a growing dread that I was, in fact, losing my grip. Then came the moment of horrifying clarity. My laptop had been running slow, so I asked my neighbor's grandson, Alex, a whiz with computers, to come take a look. As he worked, he opened the web browser to clear the history. And I saw it. A line in the list of recently viewed pages. A link from eBay. The title burned itself into my brain. Vintage 82 Omega Gold Water Mint Condition. My heart stopped. Alex, I managed to say, my voice a dry croak. Could you click on that link for me? The page loaded, and my world fell apart. There it was. My Roberts watch photographed against a cheap black velvet backdrop. The pictures were sharp, detailed. One of them was a close-up of the back, and I could read the inscription I knew by heart. To my Robert. For all the years. All my love, M. I felt like I couldn't get any air into my lungs. I scrolled down, my hand trembling on the mouse. And there it was. The seller's information. Username: Ohio Marketing Man 82. Location: Columbus, Ohio. Michael's profession. Michael's birth year. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't my failing memory. It was him. My son. He had stolen his dead father's most cherished possession, and was trying to hawk it online like some common thief. And he had used my grief as a cover story, twisting my love and trust into a weapon to make me believe I was crazy. Alex was asking if I was alright, if I needed a glass of water. But I couldn't hear him. All I could see was that screen, that betrayal in pixels and text. The grief in my heart was instantly cauterized by a rage so pure and so cold it felt like ice flowing through my veins. The game was over. I saw them now. I saw everything. And they had no idea that their victim had just woken up. After the revelation of the watch, it was like a switch had been flipped inside me. I was no longer a grieving widow. I was a soldier in a war I hadn't known I was fighting. I played my part, pretending to be the slightly confused, forgetful woman they wanted me to be. But behind my vacant smiles, my mind was working, observing, gathering intelligence. And the enemy, feeling confident, got sloppy. Their campaign to have me declared incompetent kicked into high gear. The brochures for the Golden Years Pavilion were no longer left discreetly on the coffee table. They were now propped up against the fruit bowl on the kitchen counter, or tucked into the mail I was supposed to see. Jessica would talk about it constantly. My friend's mother just moved into a place like this, Margaret. She says it's like living on a cruise ship. They have water aerobics and everything. She spoke with the forced enthusiasm of a bad salesperson, and I would just nod and murmur, "Oh, that's nice, dear." Then came the day Michael brought the official paperwork. He came over on a Saturday morning, acting as if he was just dropping by for a visit. He sat me down at the dining room table, the very table where we had carved Thanksgiving turkeys and frosted Christmas cookies, and he spread a thick sheaf of documents in front of me. The top page had durable power of attorney, printed in bold, ominous letters. "Mom," he said, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the signature line. "This is just a formality. It's so I can step in and help with your finances if you ever need it. Pay your bills, talk to the bank. It's for your protection. All it needs is your signature and a notary." He had a notary's number already programmed into his phone, he told me. So convenient. I picked up the documents, the cheap paper feeling heavy in my hands. I scanned the dense blocks of legalese. I wasn't a lawyer, but I had co-signed enough mortgages and read enough contracts with Robert to understand what I was seeing. The language was broad and sweeping. It didn't just give him the power to pay my bills. It gave him the power to liquidate my assets, to sell my property, to make all my medical decisions. It was a legal document designed to render me powerless, to turn me into a non-person with a checkbook he could control. "This seems very comprehensive," I said, choosing my word carefully. "I think I'd like my lawyer to take a look at it before I sign anything." A flash of pure, undiluted anger crossed his face before he could mask it. It was there for only a second, but I saw it. "A lawyer?" he scoffed, trying to sound amused. "Mom, don't be ridiculous. Why would you waste your money on a lawyer? I'm your son. This is to help you. Don't you trust me?" The audacity of it, the sheer brazen hypocrisy almost made me gasp. Trust him? The man who stole his father's watch? The man who was trying to strip me of my autonomy? I looked him straight in the eye and saw the lie swimming there, slick and oily. "Of course I do, sweetie," I said, my voice as sweet as poison. "But you know how your father was. Always wanted a lawyer to look at everything. I'll just feel better." I folded the papers and set them aside, a clear signal that the conversation was over. His jaw tightened, but he couldn't argue without revealing his true intentions. He had been outmaneuvered, and he knew it. The final, absolute confirmation of their endgame came the following Wednesday. I was in my front garden, tending to the rose bushes Robert had planted for me, my hands deep in the rich Ohio soil. The afternoon was quiet, and then I saw them. Across the street, parked 2 houses down, was Michael's silver SUV. And standing on the sidewalk in front of my house were Michael and another man, a stranger in a cheap, ill-fitting suit, holding a clipboard. I froze, partially hidden by a large lilac bush. They weren't even trying to be subtle. Michael was pointing at my house at the roofline at the large bay window in the living room. The stranger was nodding, making notes on his clipboard. He took out a small device and pointed it at the house. A laser measure. Then they started walking the perimeter of my property. Michael was talking animatedly, gesturing with his hands. The stranger was a real estate agent. There was no other explanation. They were assessing my home for sale. My home. While I was standing right there in the garden, a wave of nausea and rage washed over me. They were circling my life like vultures, already planning how to divide the spoils before the body was even cold. I felt a tremor of pure fury run through me, so powerful that the gardening trowel in my hand shook. I stayed hidden until they got back in their car and drove away. Then I walked back inside, my movements stiff and robotic. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with the cold, hard certainty of battle. I went straight to the phone. I didn't hesitate. I knew exactly who I needed to call. "Sarah," I said when she answered, my voice a low growl. "It's Margaret. They're making their move. I need you." There was no warmth in her reply, only the sharp focus of an old warrior hearing the call to arms. "I'm on my way," she said. "Don't sign anything. Don't talk to them. Lock your doors. We're going to war." Sarah arrived less than an hour later, a whirlwind of focused energy. She swept into my house, her leather briefcase clicking shut with a sound of grim finality. She wasn't my old college roommate anymore. She was the sharpest divorce lawyer in the state, and she was on my side. We sat at the dining room table, the fraudulent power of attorney documents lying between us like a declaration of war. "All right, Maggie," she said, her voice crisp. "First things first. We fight fire with fire. Before we do anything else, we need intelligence." Our first call was to David, my financial advisor. I authorized him to speak freely with Sarah. The conversation was short and to the point. I put the phone on speaker, and we listened as David, in his quiet, precise manner, laid out the devastating truth of Michael and Jessica's finances. He used words like foreclosure, delinquency, maxed-out credit lines, and overwhelming debt. They weren't just in trouble. They were at the bottom of a financial crater, and they were trying to pull me in with them. "They're desperate, Margaret," David concluded, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Desperation makes people do ugly things." When the call ended, Sarah looked at me, her eyes hard as diamonds. "Okay," she said. "Now we know their motive. It's not just greed, it's survival. That makes them more dangerous, and it means we have to be more ruthless. Here's the plan." And it was a brilliant plan. A plan of beautiful surgical precision. The next 24 hours were a blur of calculated action. The first step was to secure my assets. That very afternoon, I was on a 3-way call with David and a representative from the bank's wire transfer department. With Sarah guiding me through the legal language, I authorized the liquidation of my stock portfolio and the transfer of the entire contents of my and Robert's life savings. We moved every last penny into a newly created, ironclad irrevocable trust. A legal fortress so secure not even the best lawyer could breach it. The trust was named simply the Eleanor Rose Fund, after my mother and Robert's mother. Michael didn't even know it existed. Into the joint savings account, the one he watched like a hawk, I instructed David to leave a token amount, $500. Pittance. An insult. The next morning I was back in Sarah's office. The air smelled of old paper and fresh coffee. She had a new set of documents waiting for me. My revised last will and testament. We went through it clause by clause. Michael's name had been expunged. Jessica's name was gone. They were legally disinherited. My home, the one they were so eager to sell, was to be listed immediately upon my departure. The proceeds, along with the rest of my estate, were to go directly into the new trust. What about Leo and Chloe? Sarah asked, her pen hovering over the page. A sharp, painful lump formed in my throat. This was the hardest part. The children are innocent victims in their parents' war, I said, my voice thick. I want a quarter of the total estate set aside for them in a separate educational trust. Specify that it can only be used for their college tuition or vocational training. David will be the sole trustee. Their parents are to have no access, no control, no say in it whatsoever. Make it airtight, Sarah. She nodded, her expression softening for a moment. That's wise, Maggie. And it's generous. I signed the new will, my signature firm and clear. The paralegal, a young woman with kind eyes, notarized it. As the stamp came down with a solid thud, I didn't feel the triumph I expected. I felt a profound, gut-wrenching sorrow. In the eyes of the law, I had just severed ties with my only child. It was a legal amputation. But as I looked up and saw the grim, determined set of Sarah's jaw, I knew it was necessary. Sometimes, to save the body, you have to sacrifice a limb, even if it rips your heart out. That afternoon, I went home and began to pack. It was a strange, hollow exercise. How do you condense a life of 72 years into a single suitcase? I didn't take the silver or the china. I didn't take the antiques Jessica had coveted. I took practical things, clothes, my medication, a good pair of walking shoes. I packed the framed photo of Robert and me on our wedding day. And I carefully wrapped the school photos of Leo and Chloe in a soft sweater. They were the only treasures I needed. My plane ticket was booked. A one-way flight to Santa Fe, New Mexico, leaving at 6:15 the next morning. Everything was in place. The trap had been set. The escape route was clear. All that was left was to walk away and let the pieces fall where they may. That last night in my house was the longest of my life. I didn't sleep. Instead, I walked through the silent, moonlit rooms, a ghost in my own home, saying goodbye. I ran my hand along the smooth, cool wood of the dining room table and remembered the boisterous Thanksgiving dinners, the whole family laughing, the air thick with the smell of turkey and pumpkin pie. It felt like a scene from someone else's life. I stood in Michael's childhood bedroom, which had long since become a guest room, but the faint pencil marks measuring his height were still there on the doorframe. I traced them with my finger from age 5 near the floor to age 16 high above my head. How did that bright, funny little boy become the cold, calculating man who now saw me as a financial problem? The question was a dull ache in my chest, an answerless void. I lingered the longest in the living room, sitting in the darkness on the sofa, clutching a worn Afghan Robert's mother had made. I wasn't just leaving a collection of wood and plaster. I was leaving the repository of my entire adult life. 50 years of love, laughter, arguments, and memories were embedded in these walls. The grief of it all was a physical weight, pressing down on me, threatening to crush my resolve. I felt a powerful urge to just stay, to fight them here on my own turf. But then I thought of the Golden Years Pavilion. I pictured myself sitting in a sterile beige room, watching the clock on the wall, waiting for their brief, dutiful visits. I imagined them selling this house, my home, and using the money to pay for their Hawaiian vacation, their new car, their careless debts. And the grief receded, replaced by the cold, hard clarity that had become my shield. I was not going to be a prisoner in my own life. At 4:30 a.m., in the inky blackness before dawn, my pre-booked taxi arrived. The driver was a young man who looked half asleep. He loaded my single suitcase into the trunk without a word. I took one last look at the dark silhouette of my house against the lightening sky. I didn't lock the door. I left the key on the kitchen table right next to the bland, misleading note. It was a final symbolic act. This was no longer my home to protect. The drive to the Columbus airport was a silent, surreal journey through a sleeping world. The familiar streets of my town seemed alien, like a movie set I was passing through. I felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if I had become untethered from the world. At 72 years old, I was running away from home. The absurdity of it would have been funny if it wasn't so deeply tragic. The airport was beginning to stir, a place of transient souls and purposeful movement. I felt anonymous, invisible, which was exactly what I wanted. I checked my bag, went through security, and found my gate, all on autopilot. I sat in a hard plastic chair, watching the ground crew readying the plane that would be my escape vessel. I took out my phone. It felt like a foreign object in my hand, A link to a life that was already over. My finger hovered over Michael's contact information. One last motherly instinct, a foolish flickering hope that this was all a terrible misunderstanding, urged me to call him, to hear his voice one last time. But then I saw his face in my mind's eye, the coldness, the impatience. I heard his voice saying the word burden. The moment passed. The instinct died. I stood up, walked to a nearby trash can, and with a strange sense of ceremony I powered down the phone, snapped the SIM card in half and dropped the pieces inside. It was a surprisingly clean break. As I boarded the plane I didn't look back. I found my window seat and stared out at the gray Ohio morning. The plane taxied, accelerated, and then lifted into the air with a powerful surge. I watched as my life, my town, my state shrank below me. The familiar landscape flattened into a patchwork of greens and browns, then dissolved into the clouds. Tears, hot and silent, finally began to stream down my face. They weren't just tears of sorrow for what I had lost. They were tears of terror for the unknown future I was flying toward. And underneath it all, a tiny, fragile tear of release. I was leaving everything I had ever known. But I was also, for the first time, completely, terrifyingly, and gloriously free. The story of what happened back in Ohio came to me a week later, pieced together in a long phone call with David. He recounted the events with the dry, factual precision of a financial advisor, but I could hear the undercurrent of grim satisfaction in his voice. It was a tale of arrogance, panic, and spectacular collapse. The curtain rose on their little drama at 10 o'clock on Friday morning. Michael and Jessica pulled into my driveway, right on schedule, ready to play the roles of concerned children taking their confused mother for a tour of her new cage. According to my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, who had been watching from her kitchen window like a hawk, they walked up to the front door with an air of smug accomplishment. Their confidence quickly evaporated when they found the house empty, an eerie silence having replaced the life that was once there. Mrs. Gable described how they circled the house, peering into windows, their body language shifting from annoyance to a frantic, gnawing worry. Finally, they used their key and found my simple note on the kitchen table. Their immediate reaction wasn't concern for my well-being. It was pure, unadulterated fury that their well-laid plans had been disrupted. Michael, Mrs. Gable reported, stormed out of the house, pacing the lawn and shouting into his phone. They assumed I was just being difficult, staging a childish protest. They had no idea of the scale of the earthquake that was about to rupture their world. Believing they still held all the power, they decided to proceed with their victory lap. That afternoon, they walked into the most expensive travel agency in town. They settled into plush chairs opposite a smiling agent and laid out their dream vacation. 10 days in a beachfront suite at a 5-star resort in Maui. First-class flights, a private car, helicopter tours of the volcanoes, the works. The final bill was a staggering $15,400. "It's a gift from my mother," Michael announced with a magnanimous wave of his hand. "She's just so generous. She insisted we take a break." He then produced the supplementary credit card, my card, and slid it across the polished desk. The agent swiped it. A small frown creased her forehead. She swiped it again. "I'm sorry, sir," she said politely. "It's not going through." Michael laughed, a short, arrogant bark. "That's impossible. That's a premium card. Try it again." She did. The result was the same. "The terminal is giving me an insufficient funds code," she explained. "And there's a note here to call the issuing bank's fraud department. Would you like me to do that?" Jessica, her face flushing a blotchy red, snapped, "Yes, of course, there's obviously been some kind of mistake." The agent made the call. She spoke in low, professional tones, her eyes flicking back and forth between Michael and Jessica. After a few minutes that must have felt like an eternity, she hung up. Her professional smile was gone, replaced by a look of deep concern. "I am very sorry," she said, her voice now cool and distant. "The bank representative has informed me that this account has been flagged for multiple suspicious activities. Furthermore, the available balance on this account is $478. David told me he would have given a year's salary to have been a fly on the wall in that agency." The color drained from Michael's face, leaving it a pasty, sickly gray. Jessica looked as if she had been slapped. They mumbled a hasty excuse and practically fled the building, leaving the agent to stare after them, A story she would be telling for years to come. The real panic had now officially begun. The weekend was a blur of frantic phone calls. But no one had seen me, no one had heard from me. On Monday morning they bypassed the receptionist and stormed into David's office, their faces masks of rage and desperation. "Where is she, David?" Michael demanded, slamming his hand on David's desk. "What did she do with the money?" "Our money." David, a man who had faced down IRS auditors and market crashes without flinching, simply raised an eyebrow. "Firstly, Michael, it was never your money. And secondly, I am not at liberty to discuss your mother's personal affairs." "This is our affair," Jessica shrieked, her voice thin and reedy. "That was our inheritance. She's old and confused, she can't just run off with it." That was when David allowed himself a small, chilling smile. "On the contrary, Jessica," he said, his voice like silk and steel, "your mother has proven herself to be remarkably lucid. She did, however, leave something for you." He reached into his top desk drawer and pulled out the second envelope. He slid it across the desk. It landed with a soft final thud. Michael snatched it. Jessica crowded behind him, her sharp chin digging into his shoulder. David described watching their eyes scan the page, seeing the blood drain from their faces as they read. Their bravado, their anger, their entitlement. It all just evaporated, leaving behind the raw, ugly truth of their desperation. The letter was my final word, my closing argument. It laid out their entire pathetic scheme in cold, hard detail. "I know about the debts," it read. "I know about the foreclosure. I know you stole your father's watch. I know you planned to put me away and steal my life savings. What you didn't know is that I was always one step ahead. The money is gone, secured in a place you will never find. My will has been changed. You will receive nothing. You called me a burden. Now you will finally have to learn to carry your own." David said that when Michael finished reading, the letter fluttered from his nerveless fingers onto the floor. He stumbled back, collapsing into a client chair, and buried his face in his hands. A raw, guttural sob tore from his throat, the sound of a man whose entire world had just been obliterated by a single sheet of paper. Jessica just stood there, frozen, her mouth slightly open, staring at nothing. The checkmate had been delivered. And I was 1,000 miles away, breathing free air. The first month in Santa Fe was a strange paradox. During the sun-drenched days, I felt an exhilarating sense of newness. I was an explorer charting an unknown continent. I bought a ridiculously large sun hat, learned the difference between red and green chili, and spent hours wandering through dusty galleries filled with vibrant art that seemed to hum with life. The high desert landscape was a revelation. Stark, beautiful, and so profoundly different from the gentle rolling green of Ohio. It felt like I had landed on another planet. But when the sun went down and the sky exploded into a riot of orange and purple, a deep, profound loneliness would settle over me. My little rented casita, so charming in the daylight, would feel cavernous and silent at night. I had fled a home filled with bad memories, but I had landed in a life with no memories at all. There were nights I would sit in my tiny courtyard, staring up at a blanket of stars so bright they seemed to tear holes in the darkness, and I would feel an ache so deep it felt like a part of my soul had been amputated. Had I made a terrible mistake? Had I simply exchanged the prison of my son's making for a prison of my own? I knew I had to do something before the loneliness took root and choked me. I had not come all this way to wither away in solitude. I saw a flyer tacked to a bulletin board in a local coffee shop. Beginner's pottery. Find your center. It sounded cheesy, but the idea of taking a shapeless lump of clay and turning it into something real, something tangible, felt like exactly what I needed. Walking into that brightly lit, dust-covered studio at the Community Arts Center was terrifying. It was filled with people of all ages, all chatting and laughing, all seeming to know each other. I felt like the new kid on the first day of school. I almost turned and fled back to the safety of my casita. But as I hovered by the door, a woman with a magnificent mane of silver hair, a paint-splattered apron, and more turquoise jewelry than a museum display, looked up from her potter's wheel and grinned at me. "Lost or just looking to get your hands dirty?" she asked, her voice a warm, throaty rasp. "A little of both, I think," I admitted. "Well, you came to the right place," she said, wiping a streak of clay from her cheek. "I'm Eleanor. Grab an apron. The worst you can do is make a lopsided bowl, And trust me, we've all been there. Eleanor became my guide, my anchor in this strange new world. At 75, she was a retired history professor from Chicago, a widow like me, who had decided to spend her third act making art and hiking mountains. She was fiercely independent, wickedly smart, and had a laugh that could shake the dust from the rafters. She took me under her wing, introducing me to her circle of friends, a formidable group of women who called themselves the Desert Blooms. There was Maria, a 70-year-old retired nurse who had an encyclopedic knowledge of desert plants and could make a healing salve out of anything that grew. There was Sophia, a former restaurant owner whose potluck dinners were legendary. And there was Jean, a quiet, observant former librarian who had read everything and had a dry wit that could cut you to the quick. They were my salvation. They didn't pry or ask for my life story. They simply made space for me. They invited me on hikes through the foothills, to outdoor concerts on the plaza, to their weekly book club meetings that were more about drinking wine and solving the world's problems than discussing the actual book. For the first time since Robert died, I laughed. A real deep belly laugh that made my sides ache. With them, I wasn't a problem to be managed. I wasn't a widow to be pitied or a bank account to be drained. I was just Margaret. They wanted to know my opinion on the latest political scandal, what I thought of the new Georgia O'Keeffe exhibit, whether I thought my lopsided bowl looked more like a vase or a planter. They saw me. One warm afternoon, about 2 months after I arrived, I was sitting with Eleanor in her beautiful, chaotic garden. We were drinking iced tea and watching the hummingbirds fight over the feeder. I hadn't planned to tell her everything, but in the safety of her friendship, the story just spilled out. The grief, the loan, the gaslighting, the watch, the escape. I told her everything, the words tumbling over each other in a rush of long-held pain. She listened, her gaze never leaving my face. She didn't interrupt, didn't gasp, didn't offer platitudes. She just listened. When I finally finished, my voice hoarse, she reached across the small table and placed her warm, clay-dusted hand over mine. "My dear Margaret," she said, her voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "That boy of yours didn't just push you out. He pushed you out of a cage you didn't even know you were in. You didn't just escape. You were liberated. Welcome to your life." And looking at her, at the rugged mountains in the distance, at the brilliant, endless sky above, I knew she was right. The ache in my chest was gone. The loneliness had finally receded, replaced by a quiet, steady sense of belonging. The house I had left behind was no longer my home. This friendship, this community, this stark and beautiful desert, this was home now. Life in Santa Fe took on a rhythm that was both peaceful and purposeful. I had my pottery class, my hikes with the desert blooms, and my quiet mornings in the courtyard with a cup of coffee and a good book. I was healing. I was content. But contentment, I was discovering, wasn't quite the same as purpose. I had saved myself, but the question that lingered in the quiet moments was, for what? What was I going to do with this precious, hard-won freedom? The answer arrived, as so many things do, via a phone call from Ohio. It was my old neighbor, Mrs. Gable, whose capacity for gathering local news was more efficient than the Associated Press. "Margaret, dear, you are not going to believe this," she began, her voice practically vibrating with excitement. "They put the for sale sign on Michael and Jessica's lawn this morning. The big, ugly one from the bank. The foreclosure is official. They lost the house." I held the phone, a complicated knot tightening in my stomach. There was no surge of triumphant glee, no satisfying feeling of, "I told you so." There was just a profound, hollow sadness. I pictured Leo and Chloe, my innocent grandchildren, packing their toys into cardboard boxes, being uprooted from the only home they'd ever known, all because of the bottomless greed and arrogance of their parents. "And Margaret, it gets worse," she continued, clearly relishing the drama. "My nephew who works at the courthouse says Michael is being formally investigated for felony credit card fraud. Apparently, after your card was declined, he tried the same stunt with a few others. He is in a world of trouble." After I hung up, I walked out into my garden. The New Mexico sun was warm on my face, but I felt a chill deep inside. The wreckage of my son's life felt like a stain on my own. My escape, my victory suddenly felt incomplete. It couldn't just be about my own happiness. That felt selfish, small. It had to mean something more. The anger I had harbored for so long had burned itself out, And in the ashes, a new idea began to germinate. The idea was for Robert's place. My Robert was a builder not just of things but of community. He coached Little League, he served on the town council. He was the first person to show up with a casserole when a neighbor was sick. His legacy wasn't just in the house we built, but in the connections he forged. What if I could honor that legacy? What if I could take the money my son had tried to steal for his own selfish ends and use it to build something for others? The concept took hold of me with an electrifying force. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was a founder. I spent the next 2 days on the phone, first with Sarah, then with David. I want to sell my house in Ohio, I announced, my voice clear and steady. And I want to use every last cent from the sale, plus a significant portion of my trust, to start a foundation. They were both silent for a moment, stunned. Then Sarah let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be damned, Maggie. You don't do anything by halves, do you? I laid out my vision for them. Robert's place wouldn't be a sad, sterile nursing home where the elderly were warehoused and forgotten. It would be the absolute opposite. It would be a vibrant, active community center. A place of purpose. It would have workshops where retired craftsmen could share their skills, an art studio for painting and pottery, a large communal kitchen for cooking classes, and extensive gardens where people could grow their own food. It would be a place where seniors could be teachers, mentors, and creators, not just recipients of care. It would be a place to remind society, and themselves, that they were not burdens. They were resources. The project consumed me. It gave me a reason to get up every morning that was bigger than myself. My days became a blur of meetings with lawyers to set up the 501(c)(3) nonprofit, consultations with architects, and phone calls to social workers. Eleanor and the Desert Blooms became my unofficial board of directors. Maria helped design the therapeutic garden. Sophia planned the layout of the commercial kitchen. Jean started curating a library. It was no longer just my dream. It had become a shared mission. We found the perfect property after months of searching. A beautiful but neglected old adobe schoolhouse on the outskirts of Santa Fe. It had thick, mud-brick walls, high ceilings with massive wooden beams, and a rambling weed-choked yard that backed up onto an arroyo. It needed a new roof, new plumbing, and a world of love, but the bones were good. I could see it. I could see the light streaming through the big, arched windows. I could hear the chatter of conversation and the hum of activity within its walls. Standing in front of that dilapidated building, a for sale sign dangling from a single hinge, I felt a sense of profound clarity. This was my true revenge. It wasn't about watching Michael's life fall apart. It was about taking the resources he had tried to weaponize against me and transforming them into a sanctuary. I would build a place of community, connection, and dignity right on the ashes of my son's betrayal. The next 2 years were the most challenging and exhilarating of my life. The renovation of the old schoolhouse was a massive undertaking. There were days I was so overwhelmed by contractor disputes, permit delays, and budget overruns that I thought I would collapse. But every time I felt like giving up, I would walk through the construction site, see the new walls going up, and my resolve would harden. I was building more than a center. I was rebuilding myself. Finally, the day came when Robert's place opened its doors. It was a beautiful autumn afternoon. The scent of roasting green chili from a nearby farm hung in the air. The center was filled with people from the community, local artists, and our first group of founding members. Standing at the podium, looking out at the crowd of faces, my voice thick with emotion, I dedicated the center to my late husband, and to everyone who had ever been made to feel that their best years were behind them. Life settled into a new, wonderful routine. I wasn't just the founder. I was an active participant. I took a weaving class, I helped Maria in the garden, and I discovered I had a knack for organizing our popular weekly movie nights. I was surrounded by a family of my own making. A community built on shared purpose and mutual respect. My old life in Ohio felt like a distant, faded photograph. Then one evening as I was locking up the center, my cell phone rang. An Ohio number. My heart gave a painful lurch. I almost didn't answer. But a strange compulsion, a sense that this was a call I had to take, made me swipe to accept. "Am I speaking with Margaret?" A formal, weary voice asked. "Yes," I said, my throat suddenly dry. "This is Dr. Evans from Mercy Hospital in Columbus. I am calling about your son, Michael." The world tilted on its axis. What's happened? I whispered, sinking onto a nearby bench. There was an accident at his workplace, the doctor said. I learned Michael had been working for a non-union construction crew, doing manual labor. He fell 2 stories from some scaffolding. He has a compound fracture of the femur and a severe concussion. He's out of surgery and he's stable, but he has a very long recovery ahead of him. He listed you as his sole emergency contact. Sole emergency contact. The words hung in the air. His wife had left him. He had apparently alienated everyone else in his life. All he had left was the mother he had tried to discard. The irony was so bitter it tasted like acid. For 2 full days I was adrift in a sea of indecision. My friends were divided. Eleanor was furious. You owe him nothing, Margaret. Absolutely nothing. He is a grown man who made his choices. Let him lie in the bed he made. But Maria, the nurse, was quieter. Sometimes, Margaret, she said, looking at me with her kind, knowing eyes, we do things not for the other person but for ourselves. To close a chapter. So you can sleep at night. In the end, it wasn't about Michael. It was about my grandchildren. It was about the kind of woman, the kind of grandmother I wanted to be. I couldn't bear the thought of them having a father who was broken and utterly alone, with no one in the world to even bring him a change of clothes at the hospital. I booked a flight. Walking into that sterile beige hospital room was like stepping back in time. He was pale and diminished, lost in the oversized bed. His leg was encased in a monstrous assembly of metal and plaster. The cocksure arrogance that had defined him was gone, stripped away by pain and humiliation. When he saw me standing in the doorway, his eyes, the same blue eyes as his father's, widened in disbelief, then filled with a flood of tears. It was not a Hollywood reunion. There were no grand speeches of forgiveness. The wound between us was too deep, too septic for that. Our conversations were clipped, practical. I spoke to his surgeons. I arranged for physical therapy. I found a social worker to help him navigate the labyrinth of disability claims, since his job was gone, and he had no insurance to speak of. I operated with a cool, detached efficiency, a project manager handling a difficult case. But on my last day, as I stood to leave, he whispered my name. Mom. I turned at the door. Why? He asked, his voice a hoarse rasp. After everything, why did you come? I looked at the broken man in the bed, and for the first time I didn't see a monster or a stranger. I saw the tragic, wasteful end of all that potential, all that love I had poured into him. Because your father would have, I said softly, and because Leo and Chloe deserved to have at least one grown-up in their lives. I flew back to Santa Fe feeling emotionally scoured, but also strangely light. I had confronted the dragon in its lair and walked away unscathed. I had done the right thing on my own terms and felt a sense of closure. A month later, I was in the garden at Robert's place, teaching a group of children how to plant tomatoes when the pain hit. A sudden crushing weight on my chest, a vice squeezing the air from my lungs. Pain shot down my left arm like a bolt of lightning. I knew instantly. I managed to gasp, call 911 before the world went gray at the edges. I woke up in a hospital bed of my own. The rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor my new reality. A mild heart attack, the cardiologist told me. A warning shot across the bow. Lying there, staring at the acoustic tile ceiling, I was struck by the profound, terrifying clarity that only comes when you brush up against your own mortality. I had been so busy building a legacy, I'd nearly forgotten to live the life I had left. The heart attack didn't feel like an ending. Felt like a mandate. It stripped away the last layers of pride and righteous anger. Life was too short, too fragile to be ruled by the ghosts of the past. I had to decide what the final chapter would truly be about. I had to decide what kind of family, if any, I was willing to build from the ruins. It's been 5 years since my world was turned upside down. 5 years since I fled Ohio and found my footing in the high desert of New Mexico. I'm 77 now. My heart, with the help of a tiny piece of medical technology and a much healthier diet, is strong. Robert's Place is no longer a fledgling project. It's a pillar of the Santa Fe community, a vibrant, noisy, joyful hub of activity that has exceeded my wildest dreams. We have a waiting list for our woodworking classes, our garden provides fresh vegetables for a local soup kitchen, And our intergenerational mentorship program has helped 3 local high school students get scholarships to college. It is a living, breathing legacy to the man I loved and the life I chose to build. My relationship with Michael remains a delicate, carefully constructed thing. It is not the easy, instinctual bond of mother and child from long ago. That was irrevocably broken. What we have now is something quieter, more intentional. It's built on a foundation of actions, not on the shifting sands of promises. After his long, painful recovery, he had to start his life over from scratch. The divorce from Jessica was brutal, wiping out what little he had left. The felony fraud investigation ended with a plea bargain, a hefty fine and 5 years of probation. He couldn't go back to the world of marketing. Now he manages a small local hardware store. It's humble work, but it's honest. He is, for the first time I can remember, living within his means. He is in therapy, a condition I quietly insisted upon before allowing any further contact. He is finally carrying his own weight. We don't have long chatty phone calls. But every June, like clockwork, his old sedan pulls up in front of my casita. Leo and Chloe, now growing into remarkable young adults, spill out, their faces bright with the excitement of their summer adventure. Michael and I have a brief, polite exchange on the porch. We talk about the weather, the drive, the kids' school year. It is civil, it is respectful, and it is bounded by carefully maintained walls. He stays in a motel in town, and a month later he returns to drive them home. There are no illusions between us. He knows he is not welcome in my home, that he has no claim on my life or my resources. But he is their father and he shows up. And for that, I show him a measure of grace. The real heart of my story, the true and lasting joy, is my grandchildren. That month every summer is my everything. Leo, now a lanky, thoughtful 17-year-old, has become a gifted woodworker under the tutelage of one of our members, a retired carpenter named Sam. He spends hours in the workshop at Robert's place, the scent of sawdust clinging to him. He's applying to colleges now, thinking about studying architectural design. "I want to build things that last, Grandma," he told me last summer. "Things that mean something to people. Like you did here." Chloe at 15 is a force of nature. She has my fire and her grandfather's compassionate heart. She has become the unofficial historian of Robert's place, spending her time here interviewing our members, recording their life stories with a passion and empathy that astounds me. She's writing a book, she says, so that people will remember that everyone was young once, and everyone has a story worth telling. They know there is a deep and painful history. They know their parents' divorce was a consequence of terrible mistakes. But they also know a grandmother who is vibrant, engaged, and happy. They know a community that values its elders. They are growing up with a lesson I had to learn at 72. That you have the power to create your own family, to write your own ending. A few months ago, on his last day here, Leo was helping me in the garden. He was quiet for a long time, then he said, "Grandma, were you ever sorry you left Ohio?" I stopped weeding and looked at my grandson, at the fine, good young man he was becoming. "I was sorry I had to leave," I told him honestly. "I was sorry for the reasons I had to leave. But I am not sorry I ended up here." Sometimes the most painful endings are just the beginning of a much better story. And that is the truth. My life did not end when my husband died, or when my son betrayed me. That was just the prologue. My real story began at age 72, in a dusty adobe casita under a vast desert sky. I didn't get the peaceful, predictable retirement I had planned for. I got something so much better. I got a purpose. I got a community. I got a second chance at a life of my own making. My son called me a burden, and in doing so, he gave me the greatest gift imaginable. He forced me to stand up, to fight back, and to find out just how strong I really was. He set me free. Thank you for letting me share my story with you today. It's been a long and difficult journey, but one that has brought me to a place of peace. I wonder, have you ever been in a situation where you had to make a hard choice to reclaim your own life and dignity? If you feel comfortable, please share a part of your experience in the comments below. Your stories give all of us strength. And if my journey has touched you in some way, please give this video a like and subscribe for more. Remember, you are stronger than you think, and you are never ever alone.